Hofstra University's Lawrence Herbert School of Communication presents live from Studio A with the CEO of Hillman Grad Productions, Rishi Rajani.
Good evening and welcome to the Lawrence Herbert School of Communications at Hofstra University. I'm Dallas Jackson, a sophomore journalism major, and I will be your host for tonight's program. Joining us this evening is an LA-based film and television executive, Rishi Rajani, who receives all divisions of one of the most prominent production and media companies in entertainment. As someone at the forefront of empowering underrepresented artists, tonight's guest embodies the spirit of Herbert School's Live from Studio A series, which brings influential media professionals to campus so that they can share their stories, insights, and advice with Hofstra students. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Rishi Rajani.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Oh, mic is pretty loud. I believe the last time I was at Hofstra University, I was here for an intercollegiate Quidditch tournament, actually. Like the real life version of the Harry Potter sport where you pretend to ride brooms and chase after a human snitch. I know it sounds incredibly nerdy because it is. But you have to admit there's something special about a story good enough to get college kids to wake up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday to run around a field and play make-believe. And while I have a great deal of affection for the Harry Potter series and a lot less affection for its surprisingly misguided creator, we're not here to talk about Quidditch. We're here to talk about storytelling. I love stories. I love books. I love movies. I love TV shows. I love podcasts. I love music. I love theater. I love every narrative medium. And I'm lucky enough to be in a job that allows me to work across all of them. As CEO of Lena Waithe's media company, Hillman Grad, I spend my time collaborating with and working with artists to get their stories out into the world. It's a wonderful privilege and not one that I take lightly. Popular culture impacts everything. It's the lens through which we see society and the foundation for so many of our biases, desires, and aversions. It can normalize and bring people closer together, and it can stigmatize and divide us. Who gets to be the hero? Who gets cast as the villain? Even worse, who gets relegated to the sidelines? These decisions have tangible consequences and directly influence our perceptions of one another. For that reason, I feel an immense amount of responsibility to put out intentional narratives, messages that I can stand behind, content that reflects the diversity of our planet and pushes the culture forward. The kinds of stories that would have meant the world to me as a kid. That's why I do what I do, because representation matters. Now, rather than spending this time talking about all the ways the entertainment industry has failed on a macro level when it comes to representation, which, believe me, I could wax poetic about for hours, I'd like to take a more personal approach. I've been thinking a lot about how the media I consumed while growing up directly impacted my own personal self-confidence and self-worth. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to tell you my story. My family is of South Asian descent, specifically from Gujarat in India. But my parents were actually born in Africa, my mom in Uganda, my dad in Malawi. Brief history lesson. Both sides of my family were caught up in the mass expulsion of South Asians from Africa. It's not particularly well known, but during the period of British colonization, many Indians came to East Africa as an artificial middle class, created by the British, which pushed themselves between the British and the black Africans. As you can imagine, this created a lot of tension. When British rule ended, Idi Amin, the former ruler of Uganda, decided that he wanted the South Asians out. My family's property and bank accounts were seized, they were rounded up by soldiers, loaded onto planes, and sent to the UK as refugees. That's where I was born. Despite having lost everything, my family did an incredible job picking themselves up and building a foundation for the next generation. In search of further opportunity, my parents decided to move to the US. We ended up in a small town called Watertown, in the middle of nowhere upstate New York, basically on the Canadian border. It was a lovely, idyllic place to be a kid, with lots of biking and sledding. But it was also the first place that I experienced otherness. We were the only South Asian family in a predominantly white part of the world. Being brown, being vegetarian, being Hindu, bringing Indian food to elementary school were all things that made me stand out in the community. It brought me unwanted attention. I didn't know that I fully understood it at the time, but I was starting to equate being different as being a bad thing. During my time in Watertown, I also started to fall in love with storytelling. I give my parents a lot of credit for making sure that my two sisters and I grew up with exposure to culture. My mom would pack up my sisters and I in the minivan, take us to Montreal and Toronto to go see ballets and musicals and art shows. And I spent a lot of my time at the library, devouring the kids and young adult sections and being transported into world after world. Now, as important as it was for me to have books and movies to escape into, less TV. My parents refused to get cable, so I was stuck with PBS. The fact is, the vast majority of content I consumed had white protagonists. And if there were ever people of color, they were generally the villains or the sidekicks there to make the heroes' lives easier. I never saw myself on screen. And in all honesty, whenever I picked up a new book, I immediately assumed that the characters were white, and I imagined them as such. The impact of that is immeasurable. How could I ever believe that I was worthwhile if all the stories I loved considered brown characters worthless? There are two films that I'd like to specifically highlight that had a considerable impact upon my childhood. The first is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. For those of you who have seen the film, you might know where I'm going with this. Temple of Doom is the second installment in the famous Indiana Jones franchise created by George Lucas and directed by Steven Spielberg. It tells the story of Indiana Jones, the white fictional archaeologist and adventurer played by Harrison Ford. In this film, Jones goes to India and is asked by desperate villagers to find a mystical stone and rescue their children from a cult. Already, it's a narrative in which the destitute brown characters are unable to help themselves and need a white savior. Not to mention that during the movie, Indiana has a Chinese child sidekick named Short Round, played by the incredible Ki Hoi Kyun, who we'll come back to later, encounters a grotesque Indian meal of monkey brains, which I assure you is not part of our culinary heritage, is absolutely awful to the romantic lead Willie, who is given no character depth besides shrieking or fainting whenever something happens, and saves the day by defeating a group of brown religious fanatics who perform human sacrifices by reaching into their victims' chests and ripping out their hearts. Another practice that was oddly missing from my childhood temple. Suffice to say, Temple of Doom is a horribly racist and misogynistic film that was incredibly irresponsible in its messaging and representation. It's also a movie that I loved. So did all my friends. Indiana Jones was our hero. We all wanted to be like him. Society told us that he was the ideal, which in itself was pretty scary. But the most difficult part of this for me was that I was never going to be Indiana Jones. I didn't look like him. I looked like the guy who ripped people's hearts out with his bare hands. That was said directly to me by kids in my class. So of course this film negatively impacted my self-worth. Indiana Jones' world became our world, a world in which I was not allowed to be a hero. On the flip side, I'd like to highlight another film, Spy Kids, written and directed by Robert Rodriguez. Spy Kids tells the story of a Latinx American family, the Cortezes, in which the parents, played by Antonio Banderas and Carla Gugino, are secretly spies. At the beginning of the film, the parents get kidnapped, and the kids, Carmen and Junie, played by Alexa Vega and Daryl Sabara, have no choice but to go rescue them. Carmen and Junie felt like real kids dealing with real problems. Junie gets bullied for being a nerd and has warts on his fingers from anxious sweating. Carmen doesn't feel like she fits in at school and rejects her heritage. The film doesn't shy away from the cultural background of its characters and leans into the duality of being a child of immigrants. They spoke multiple languages, ate different foods, and there's a wonderful moment where Carmen realizes that her full Mexican name is actually a secret password. Robert Rodriguez had to battle the studio to make the family Latinx. The studio asked him, "Why are you making them Latin, though? Why don't you just make them American?" And Rodriguez responded, "They are American. They're based on my family." Spy Kids is a shining example of what happens when you cast with intention of a message that you can stand behind. The film was a massive hit, grossed $150 million at the box office, and spawned an incredibly successful franchise with multiple sequels and a TV show. And even though I'm not Latinx, I felt a kinship with the Cortezes. Seeing this film in theaters gave me a fresh perspective. I left empowered. I wanted to be a spy kid. In this case, I believed that I was worthy of being the hero because I saw protagonists that were like me, saving the day. The sad truth is that at that time, Spy Kids were few and far between, and the vast majority of content was far more in line with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. One film wasn't enough to alter my societally defined perspective, but it was a step in the right direction. At the age of 11, my family moved from upstate New York to a suburb of Portland, Oregon called Lake Oswego, another incredibly white place. Like everyone else, I had to deal with the trial and tribulations of middle school and high school with the added factor of being one of 3 brown kids in my grade. My instinct was to reject everything Indian. I desperately wanted to fit in, to be cool, to be attractive, to be normal, AKA white. And time again, I was reminded that I was always going to be different. It was a place of microaggressions, a joke here, a casual comment there, and a general expectation that I would always exhibit model minority behavior. I left Lake Oswego with a great deal of insecurity and baggage that has followed me well into adulthood. I went to NYU for school thinking that I was going to be an investment banker. At the time, I had no idea that the job of producer even existed, and despite my love for books and movies, I honestly didn't think I could be part of those industries. I wasn't exposed to them and didn't know anyone working in the entertainment business, certainly not anyone brown. I figured I would just go make a bunch of money on Wall Street, retire early, and figure it out. But I spent one day shadowing at Goldman Sachs and threw that plan out the window. No offense to any of the bankers in the room, it's not my scene. Being at NYC exposed me to more of the world. It also taught me that working in the film industry was a tangible possibility. I decided to minor in producing and Tisch and moved all my classes to 2 days a week so that I could get internships on the other days. My entry point in the business was an internship with Morgan Spurlock after Supersize Me. Then I went to work a bunch of strange jobs, including answering a Craigslist ad to work for this off-Broadway show where they hired me to sell the film rights to the show, which is not something they should have hired a 19, 20-year-old kid to do. I did strangely publicity work for former child pop star Aaron Carter. I pretended to be a talent manager for my friends in the acting school and would call casting offices and pretend to get really angry that they hadn't given my friends auditions. It actually kind of worked. I got my real estate license to sling apartments on the weekends, but eventually ended up getting a gig with 20th Century Fox in their book to film division. And that was a jackpot moment for me, a life-changing moment for me. It was a job at Fox Books, of the Fox Book Scouts to track down books pre-publication and assess them for potential adaptation. There's almost like an espionage element to it. You had to work to get information before any of the other studios to make sure that you landed the hot book. But mostly getting to read books and talk about them for a job was a dream come true. While I was at Fox, they acquired Gone Girl and The Martian, which went on to become massive titles. It was also where I started to hone my personal taste. Each morning I was given a stack of papers and newsletters and magazines from New York Times and Wall Street Journal to GQ and People, and I would comb through them and highlight stories that I thought could be movies. I was wrong a lot of the time, but those conversations became the foundation for my knowledge about the studio system and what made a good story cinematic and what could sell. It was a great job, but I knew that I wanted to get closer to the action. As a book scout, you find the material and you pass it along to executives and producers, but I wanted to be an executive or producer. The team at Fox helped set me up with interviews at all the talent agencies in Los Angeles. I went out there, took the bus from agency to agency, which is apparently not a thing that people in LA do, but pitched my heart out to a lot of HR executives. I got an offer from UTA to come be in their mailroom. There's a lot of mystique around the Hollywood mailroom, but the truth is that it's like grad school for the entertainment industry. An agency is the hub of information in Hollywood. You get the opportunity to see exactly who the big players are and how business is done. You get to listen in on all your boss's phone calls. I quickly became an assistant to an incredible book agent named Dana Spector, who's still a mentor to me to this day. In a whirlwind series of events, she got asked to head up the book to film division at another agency called Paradigm and asked me to go with her. So 4 months into my job at UTA, I was already out the door to a new company. Paradigm was a smaller, less cutthroat environment than UTA, and it was there that I met many colleagues that are still some of my closest friends today. It was also a place where the senior agents routinely confused me with the only other 2 brown men that were at the company. As an assistant, I never corrected them. Hollywood felt a lot like my high school, incredibly white and incredibly privileged. And like in high school, I was desperately trying to fit in. It was more important for me to succeed than it was for me to call out my boss for being racist. I didn't want to do anything that would rock the boat or jeopardize my career. After a year of being an assistant at Paradigm, Dana asked if I was open to becoming a book agent, still holding on to my desire to be part of the production process. I declined, decided to take on an assistant job at a new company called Studio 8. Studio 8 was started by Jeff Robinov, the former chairman of Warner Brothers. He had raised $1 billion in financing, put together an output deal with Sony, and everyone was incredibly excited about his new venture. I rose through the ranks and became a junior executive there. And slowly but surely, I became disillusioned with this organization. It was very old school, and white men reigned supreme. I wasn't able to get any of the projects across the finish line that I wanted to from diverse creators. It got to the point where I started to question whether or not I even wanted to be in the film business at all. If I should just go do something like social entrepreneurship or something that was actually making the world a better place. I'd been so set upon being part of the old boys club, fitting in as the easy minority to hang out with, and ignoring the microaggressions and terrorist jokes, that I actually started to hate myself. It was during this time that I met Lena Waithe. Lena came barreling into my life as a breath of fresh air. We initially connected over a project I was working on Studio 8 that was called Black, set in a world in which only black people have superpowers. Lena and her collaborator, Kathy Kasakie, came in with a brilliant take that ended in a race war, which concerned my bosses, to say the least. They ended up passing on it, but a couple months later, I got a call from Lena's manager to come interview to be her executive. I don't think I've ever prepped harder for an interview in my life. I came in with these massive file folders full of lists of writers and directors and various books that I thought that she'd adapt, and I'm pretty sure she thought I was crazy, but I think she liked my energy. And we talked a lot. We talked about our frustration with Hollywood's diversity renaissance, the idea that there is this monolithic interpretation of who black and brown and disabled and queer people are, and that there's only one way to be each of them. And so we discussed building a company that celebrated diversity authentically and empowered artists. Lena told me that she always knew she was going to win an Emmy, which is badass and so confident, but she didn't know she was going to win one that early in her career. She wanted to earn that award every day by opening the door and pulling in the next generation of storytellers. I was super inspired by that. And that night, I got a call saying that Lena wanted to hire me. That was 4.5 years ago. During my time at Hillman Grad, I finally gotten to be a producer and make projects that I can stand behind. We started out with just Lena and I working out of coffee shops and writers' rooms and wherever we could get a space. Since then, we've grown to be a company of 20 people with a film and TV division under an overall deal with Warner Brothers Television, a record label with Def Jam, a book publishing imprint with Zando Books, a podcast vertical, a fashion line, and a branded content division. We produce critically acclaimed films, including Queen and Slim, The 40-Year-Old Version, and Beauty, and incredibly popular TV shows like The Chi, Twenties, and Boomerang. We've become known for being the home for emerging talent through our mentorship programs and capacity to produce first feature films. Our lineup for next year includes 1001 for Focus Features, written and directed by A.V. Rockwell, starring Tiana Taylor, and Shank and Dunk, starring Bloom Lee and directed by Jing Yi Xiao. Both directorial debuts starring and created by people of color. I'm incredibly proud of the company that we've built, but I'm even more proud of my personal growth. Thanks to Lena believing in me and empowering me, and constantly reminding me to show my teeth, I've stepped into my own as a brown man, become more comfortable speaking up for myself, and finally feel a sense of pride for my heritage. We still have a lot of work to do, but I'm grateful to be part of the shift in Hollywood, to see shows like Atlanta, I May Destroy You, and Reservation Dogs be celebrated, to witness Crazy Rich Asians storm the box office, to watch all the reaction videos of young black and brown women seeing a black Ariel. Representation matters. I'd like to end by telling you about another film. Earlier this year, I went to go see Everything Everywhere All at Once by the Daniels. It's an absolutely stunning movie and one you should all go see. Brilliant, emotional storytelling, insane visuals, and an Asian cast that feels incredibly authentic. And in the role of the husband, an interdimensional hero, is our guy, Ki Hoi Kwan, the same actor who played Short Round in Temple of Doom. And as I watched his beautiful performance, I got emotional. He was finally a lead, finally had his moment to shine. And I thought, if Ki can be a hero, maybe the rest of us Asian kids can too. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi, for your insightful and inspiring presentation. As a journalism student and Hofstra Student Government Association's Equity and Inclusion Chair, I've grown to understand the importance of upholding standards of representing diverse communities, as media is a reflection of the world around us. We're going to move on now to a moderated discussion where Rishi Rajani, and a member of the Herbert School's faculty, Ashish Kumar is a professor of radio, television, film, a Fulbright scholar, and award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work turns a spotlight on such issues as emerging democracies, social stigmas, globalization, migration, civic engagement, and grassroots advocacy. Following their talk, we will take questions from members of the audience. Now please give a warm welcome to Ashish Kumar.
Thank you, Rishi, for taking us through that amazing journey right up to the present moment, and what a nice cycle of representation that you brought us through. I have a small gig here to warm you up for what's the real deal, which is our students, who I'm sure have very incisive and insightful questions to ask of you. So let me start by posing some bleak statistics. In 2017, UCLA, along with Color of Change, published a report that looked at the diversity within the Hollywood writers' room. This is what they found. They surveyed 235 original scripted shows, and 65% of them had 0 black writers. And only 17% had maybe 2 or more writers, black writers. 91% of these shows were led by white showrunners, and only 5% had black showrunners. Now, it's interesting that the report came out in 2017 because 2 years ago, there was the Oscar So White movement, which had started a reckoning of sorts. And I'm curious to know that in the wake of the report, with Oscar So White happening, and then more recently, with the brutal murder of George Floyd, and how it sort of put the spotlight on how these conversations are happening, have you seen a shift in addressing these imbalances from where you work?
I have seen a slight shift, but certainly not enough of a shift. I think the conversation is happening a lot more now, which is better than before, where the conversation wasn't happening at all. But you're still facing a lot of the same issues for these artists, and that's the considerable barriers to entry to break into the industry. It's access, it's financial status, it's connections, and resources to actually be able to make things. And so what you're finding is a lot of people that are allowed to be creators in Hollywood are still the same people that have always been allowed to be creators, which are the kids of agents and managers that tend to be white, that tend to be in a financial tax bracket to allow them to not have to work or not have to sustain a job so they can focus instead on their art and their creativity. And so I think there was a pretty significant failing, even in sort of the years that you were mentioning, of diversity programs in Hollywood. They all felt for show. They never felt like they were really there to actively build people's careers. And even for a lot of the writers' rooms, a studio or a network would pay for a diverse writer to be in a room as a staff writer for a year. And then after that year, the funding would go away. And so for a writer's room, you'd watch time and time again people getting hired for their first staff writing gig and then not getting hired again because it wasn't actually there to sustain someone's career. It was for show. And so I think one of the things that when Lena and I have talked a lot about is in the context of our company and building out an intentional mentorship program, how do we be everyone's rich parents and let them be able to create things? And so that's why we partnered with companies like Indeed to make sure that a director who's working on a short film gets paid and doesn't have to work during that time period and gets a $100,000 budget for their short, and then gets to come to Hillman Grad where they get access to a directing mentor and then an alumni network and get follow-up year after year to make sure that they've gotten to sign with representation, that there's not anything that they need to be able to sustain their careers moving forward. And that's got to be the shift. That's got to be how people think about it, that nothing's going to change unless we make active decisions and active choices to actually bring more people into the business.
I'm going to do a slight pivot, bringing that conversation to the studio of a prominent school of communication. And we have been having our own conversations of this kind. We've been thinking about what we teach, what we show in our classes, who we hire, and also who we invite to talk to our students. I'm going to ask you a two-part question. So what can you share from these experiences of intentional, meaningful change with the students who are in this room, who are navigating this very tricky career, figuring out their own stories, figuring out their own space? And that'll be my first part.
Yeah, I mean, breaking into the business for anybody is difficult, but it's made easier by institutions of higher education as well. I wouldn't have gotten my first internships if I hadn't seen them on career lists at NYU. And so to me, it's taking advantage of every single opportunity that your institution has for you and putting yourself out there in that way. And the thing is there's a certain level of just being bold. I think when I came to UTA, I knew that I wanted to be on a book. I wanted to be in the book department. That's what my love was. And on that first day that I was there, I was told that I wasn't going to be able to go up for an assistant position for at least a month. I had to take part in a thing called UT University. But the day that I arrived was also the day that Dana, my boss, was looking for an assistant. And so I had to make the choice and the decision to be bold and to walk into Dana's office and ask the question if I could at least interview to be her assistant, which was kind of going against the norms and the expectations of what I was supposed to do while I was there. And so just know that there are no rules, that there are systems that are designed to keep especially diverse people out of Hollywood, and that sometimes you do have to break the rules and sometimes you do have to be bold to get your story told and get your point across.
And what do you think we in academia could do differently to engage in meaningful change with representation?
I think, well, I learned a lot of the practical skills of producing when I was in university. No one really told me how the business worked. No one really told me how the industry worked. No one told me that I should go be in a mailroom. No one told me what the right entry points are. I need to have this many internships on my resume. And I think a lot of times educational institutions, especially at this level, are focused on the craft, but without focusing on people's ability to actually make it in their careers. And you end up in those same loops of the people that were going to make it anyway because of where they come from, because of their background, will make it, while the people who don't leave university kind of floating. And so being able to tap into alumni networks, being able to tap in and follow up with students in a way, and especially for your students that are diverse and come from lower income brackets, like to provide that additional bump and assistance for them and to provide more access points for them and to provide more people that look like them around, I think are all really important.
Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to open it up to the floor, and we have some students questions for you.
Hello, and thank you so much for spending the time with us here today. We really, truly appreciate it. My name is Kashmir Pandit, and I am currently a sophomore here at Hofstra University. My majors are in public policy and political science, with minors in international affairs and global studies. And I'm currently the Club Resources Chair for Student Government, as well as the Secretary for the South Asian students here on campus. As a South Asian Hindu woman, I understand the diversity and the beauty of embracing that diversity that we have on campus. And so in that diversity, I realized that each person here is a reflection of many multifaceted moments and people that have made us who we are today. And so my question is a two-part question as well. One is, who are the heroes and the moments that you refer to or think back to when you are crafting your films? And in turn, how do your films, or how do you perceive them to be the moments, the pivotal moments in someone else's story?
I mean, my heroes, a lot of the time when I was coming up in the business, were the brown people that were out there and putting themselves on camera as well. Hassan Minaj's Patriot Act and in his first special, Homecoming King, was, I feel like, the first time I had really seen my story represented on screen. And so he was a hero for me. Riz Ahmed was a hero for me. Lena was a hero for me, and still continues to be a hero for me. And I think what I've found is that a lot of the opportunities that I've had in the business have come from mainly women, and certainly from women of color as well, who have seen me in a way that is different than I think a lot of straight white men saw me. And so those are the people that are the heroes, the people that looked at me and gave me a shot and figured I was worthwhile for an opportunity. In terms of capturing another person's moments in their lives on film, I mean, it's a really sort of delicate process, and for me, it's just incredibly important who the filmmaker is, and that they're approaching the subject matter with respect and with authenticity and with an eye and a lens towards telling a story. And while I'm not going to sit here and say that one person should tell a story or another person can't tell a story, it's pretty clear when a filmmaker or an artist does not fundamentally understand the people or culture that they're trying to represent on screen. And that's how you end up with cliches and misrepresentations and things that just feel really shitty for everybody. And so it's really important to me, and I think important to everyone at Hillman Grad, that when we are telling stories that are reflections of any specific group, demographic, that we're doing the work and doing the research and putting the time in to find artists and filmmakers behind the camera across all the spectrums of departments, and costume designers, and hair and makeup and wardrobe, and people that can really fundamentally capture the authenticity of it. It's super important.
Thank you so much, and thank you for highlighting the diversity through your work. Thank you.
Hi, just want to say it was a pleasure hearing your story and your journey in the film industry and where you've gone today. And I just want to say it's just an honor just to have you here and just speaking with us today. My name is Charlie Norton. I'm a Bachelor of Fine Arts filmmaking major with minor creative writing. I am a senior. And I have a question for you on confidence and building your confidence in the film industry and getting to where you are today. And as just kind of how we as students our goal is to build our own confidence to get to hopefully the position that we want to long term. And I guess how do you define confidence in making, I guess, work, starting off when you were getting your when you were starting off, where you were beforehand, and how do you perceive confidence in driving to get people to want to look at you and to hire you and bring you on projects, and how can that wisdom that you went through and kind of building on your work in trying to get to, I guess, how to build confidence in our lives. Yeah.
Man, I'm still building my confidence. I think it's a very particular thing, right? And it's you have to feel like you deserve to be there. And I think one of the biggest things is if you don't believe it yourself, then people aren't necessarily going to believe it in the room either. But the thing that I'm working on, I feel like I still deal with lots of levels of imposter syndrome, even after having produced films, even after running a media company now, where I still get into spaces where I feel small or feel like I am, not worthy of being in this particular room or with this group of people, or I'm at a party and no one wants to talk to me because everyone's really famous. And so it's very easy, especially I think in the film and TV industry, to lose confidence because it's also a particular business that is, I think, particularly manufactured to make people feel small. And so if you do the work and you come in with the skills and you do the research and you know that you've taken the time to be as prepared as you possibly can for every room that you step into, carry that confidence with you and carry the belief that you deserve to be there. And that's kind of the most I can say on it.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Emma, and I'm a senior BFA filmmaking major, creative writing minor, and I also want to thank you so much for being here today and for speaking with us. And my question has to do with, you started off wearing a lot of different hats in the industry. Like, you talked about all the different jobs that you had, and looking at your credits, I noticed that you also have writing credits in there, so I was just wondering how all of those different jobs that you've held throughout the industry have influenced your current position as CEO and being an executive producer.
That's one of my favorite things about the film industry, to be honest, is that it's incredibly fluid, and producers become executives, executives become managers, managers become writers, writers become producers. And so I wouldn't say that there's one definitive path to making it either the business side or the creative side of the business. And so you find your entry point where you can, and I love that my entry point was in book to film, and that became a calling card for me, and that's what made me it's what made Studio 8 want to hire me, is because I have that very particular background in book to film, book to TV. But that doesn't mean that you can't, go on to be a producer from there, or go be a writer, go make your own film. But all those experiences really help. Whatever facet of the business that you can work from. I was not someone that really worked on sets at all when I was coming up. I was much more of like an office intern type person. And when I first got to set, I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here. And it would have been really nice to have been, a PA or to have actually had on-set experience in a real traditional capacity so that I wouldn't come in blind. But because I had the background in the executive side, I was the producer that was the main liaison with the studio and the network because I knew how to talk to those people and I'd known a lot of those people. And so, yes, it's a lot of different hats, but all those different experiences, I think, have really helped me to be in a place where I can speak to artists with honesty and respect level for knowing their craft and knowing how hard it is, too.
Thank you.
Hi, Rishi. My name is Fatima Moen. I'm a graduate student here under the journalism program. My question is, you mentioned and you prioritize a lot on diversity, and in a world that wants diverse stories, how do people of color carry themselves without a sense of entitlement when it comes to getting those jobs and putting ourselves out there? As a Pakistani Muslim woman, I can put out my labels and have those labels open doors, but I also don't want to carry myself where I'm just getting jobs because I'm a woman, I'm Pakistani, I'm Muslim. So how would you say we, people of color, of all sorts of labels, balance that confidence without coming off too entitled?
I mean, get more entitled. It is like, there'll be a lot of white guys out there that say that you're getting a job because you're Muslim or a woman, and like, it's just not true. It's like, it's a fundamental like disconnect in a line of reasoning, because what's happening is now that all these white guys now have to actually compete on the same level as the rest of us. And the balance is still so incredibly, I mean, you heard the statistics from here, it's like, even if there is this perception that we're all getting jobs now because of the color of our skin, it's just not what's happening in the business. And so, again, go in there with confidence, go in there winning the job and understanding that you earned that job. And I want to see a lot more confidence and a lot more entitlement from young black and brown kids that are coming up, because it's something that we haven't had for so long. We've had to be the most excellent people in the room. We've had to be far and above and the biggest achievers. And I think for me now, it's like there's a pretty significant issue in that all the people at the heads of all these studios and networks are still straight white guys. And it's still, when you get to the ultimate top of all these places, they're the decision makers, not us. And so we still have work to do. And so barreling your way into as many rooms as you can and getting to the top of many of these spots as you can is incredibly key. I found that a lot of my colleagues and friends who came up in the studios like I did have all gone out of the studios. We're all producers now. That's a problem. It's really important for us to kind of carry this with us, and so that I want to see someone brown. I want to see a brown woman running a studio.
Hello again, long time no talk. I'm Danny DiCrescenzo, junior here at the Herbert School, audio radio major, creative writing minor. I'm the morning show director for RHU here at the Herbert School. I'm also on student government communications chair. What I wanted to ask you is about your creative process. For me, I feel like I'm never really consistent with how I create, and I feel like it's different for everybody. And as somebody who's been exposed to a variety of different stories over your life, somebody who's had a hand in creating a variety of stories over the course of your career, how do you develop a process for figuring out what sort of stories, what kind of tales will stick, will sell, will resonate with audiences in your career?
So I think probably one of the biggest parts of my job as a producer is to rein in everybody else's creative processes. It's challenging to channel creativity into a commercial product. And so a lot of what I'll do with writers is, when we start out from the frame of reference from an idea, we'll start with kind of blue sky sessions in terms of brainstorming how exactly you want to go through kind of story and structure, and then giving them time and space to actually go off and start crafting a narrative. Whether that's a film treatment, I tend to really like the Save the Cat beat sheet for film, and on the TV side, looking at sort of very standard kind of pilot structure. And then once we have a story together and kind of the very earliest piece of the story, it's then beating that story up and taking it through the revision process of how do we kind of twist this? How do we continue to make it surprising? But how do we also think about it as additive to the culture? Like, what's the point of this project beyond the world? If we have the privilege and the opportunity to actually tell stories on a large scale, can we stand behind this message? Do we think it's important enough? Do we think it's valid enough? And so when I'm working with creatives, I'm thinking about all those big questions. I'm thinking about, is this different, more different than anything I've ever seen in my life? Is this unique? Is it going to stand out? Is it accessible? And ultimately, does it matter? Do I care about it? Do I care about it enough? Does the artist care about it enough to spend the next 2 to 6 years maybe getting it off the ground? And film and TV industry is tough. Most of the things I develop don't make it to screen. I've got about 40 projects in development right now. And so it's all about making sure that you're willing to work day in and day out for a project.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jake. I'm a sophomore video and television student here at the Herbert School. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us as young, inspiring storytellers. It really means a lot for you to take the time. I was wondering, part of the process of getting better is learning through failure. And through failure, it can be stressful or worrisome to have to go up against that to get better. And I was just wondering, is there a particular story or memory that you have where maybe you failed in the moment, but you learned and were inspired and got better because of it?
Oh man, there's a lot of those moments. But one particular one jumps out to me. In my first year at Hillman Grad, I produced Boomerang Season 1, which was a TV show for BET that was based off of the Eddie Murphy film, the legendary Eddie Murphy film from back in the day. And again, I had never really done this before. I was moved to Atlanta for 3 months, was overseeing a set, working with a lot of first-time filmmakers, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But one particularly bad one was there was an episode that we were shooting that all took place in a parking lot. And for a more experienced producer, they might have looked at that script and gone, hey, there's no rain cover built in here or any weather. What are we going to do if there's inclement weather? I approved that script without necessarily thinking about those things. And so cut to an entire cast and crew being miserable, stuck in a parking lot in the rain for 4 days straight as lots of people were asking the question, why did no one think about the rain cover in the set? Who approved this one? Me going, it's a lesson learned. But I think the kind of thing that I really appreciate, though, is that I had the opportunity to go do that. I got the opportunity to go be on set as a producer and make mistakes and learn from them and get better at my craft. And that's not an opportunity that's afforded to a lot of people these days. And so whenever there's anyone, I have a team of executives now, and I much prefer that they go and make the mistake and ask the question than never have the opportunity to do it at all. And so I'm sure I'm going to continue to make a lot of mistakes in my producing career, but hopefully I can at least not make the same mistake twice.
Hello again, another long time no talk. My name is Maria Valdez. I'm a sophomore journalism student here at Hofstra with a minor in political science. I am also the news director here at WRHU FM. And my question for you is, you mentioned one key phrase that really stuck out to me, which was imposter syndrome. And that's a conversation that me and one of my colleagues at the station constantly have, being women that are at our age holding leadership positions in a news environment. And I wanted to ask you, when you hit that moment, when you get imposter syndrome, what are some steps that you take to kind of overcome it and not let it just completely freeze you up for a minute?
I definitely freeze up for a minute. But I have to remind myself again that that I deserve to be there. That even if I'm not the most qualified person in that room, even if I don't have all the knowledge, even if I haven't been doing this for 30 years, that it's not that I don't deserve to be there. And I think a lot of times in my career, approach things from the kind of standpoint of being grateful to have a seat at the table. And it may be very easy to kind of steamroll and walk all over. And I think, Lena always loves to use this phrase, show your teeth. And it's something that she helped me out a lot with, because she was like, listen, if you're gonna run my production company, you're gonna be bold. And getting that sort of empowerment and reminder from her was the thing that also really helped me. And it's that sort of empowerment and reminder I like to give to everyone on my team, that you deserve to be there. And so be bold and be fearless.
Thank you, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here and speak with everyone today.
And it looks like that's all the time we have for Q&A. 3 takeaways: be bold, be entitled, and represent. Rishi, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the entire Herbert School community and Hofstra University for sharing your wonderful insights and taking the trip from the West Coast.
Amazing.
Please
Thank you
join
so
me in
much for
applause.
having me, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, Rishi Rajani, and all of you for watching this first installment of Live from Studio A. We look forward to seeing you again on October 7th for our next guest. We hope that you all have a fabulous night and stay tuned.